First of all, thank you all, Sabine. Thank you, Sabine, for coming and visiting us tonight. It's a great honor to have you here. She's a great public servant in her own right, so thank you very much for doing this. I loved your comment about being nervous at the prom. I recently went back to my 50th high school reunion, and I ran into a former classmate there. We started talking. I said to her, you know, you were the first girl I ever invited to a real prom, to our junior prom, and it was the first time I'd ever invited. She smiled and looked at me and said, worst date of my life. So we're now going to move on because I have the pleasure, I get a kind of a twofer because I'm going to introduce one great USTR to give our award to another great USTR, and it's really an honor for me even to be up here with the two of them because I got to serve as Carla's deputy for 4 years in Geneva, and there's nobody I admire or respect more than Carla Hills, and I think it's great for us to be giving her this honor. I may say a personal word or two after Susan's introduction, Carla, but it's great to have you here. You really honor us with your presence. And turning to Susan Schwab, who, of course, you know, she's been a friend and colleague since our days in the Senate together, but what a great public servant she's been. And Susan, I'm constantly amazed by your continuing contribution to the trade community. She's now taken on the role as chair of NFTC. I hope Jake is easier to handle than I was, but being chair of that organization is an important responsibility. So let me bring to the podium a person you all know really well, former USTR Susan Schwab.
Rufus, thank you very much. Rufus and I go back a long way, and during the, I hate to admit it, 88 Trade Act, or in the leading up to the 88 Trade Act, we spent a whole lot of time together trying to get that piece of legislation done. And I will be eternally grateful for your work. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about NAFTA. Not the NAFTA superhighway, but the NAFTA superwoman. Oh, there she is. I'm thinking, Carla, where are you? Anyway, so I'm going to be talking about the NAFTA superwoman. Tonight, I am delighted to have the opportunity to introduce, and it's such a silly word, we all know Ambassador Carla Hills, but to present the award, the Lifetime Achievement Award, on behalf of the Washington International Trade Association and the Washington International Trade Foundation to Ambassador Carla Hills. I get a few minutes. I get a couple minutes. So I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about her bio. You can read it. Rufus is going to talk about Carla. So I'm going to try to tell you a few things about Carla that you might not otherwise know. I'm going to start, though, with some words that describe Ambassador Hills. You heard Rob Portman this evening talk about incomparable. You have to add legendary, tough, astute, ultra-prepared, unquestioned integrity. I first met Carla, I guess, early 90s. You were USTR. I was Assistant Secretary of Commerce and Director General of the Commercial Service. And yes, Commercial Service. Secretary Mosbacher asked me to go on this trip with the USTR to Mexico City. And I'd never met her before. And we go to Mexico City, and I'm thinking, who is this woman, and how did she learn all this stuff at HUD? She was a gifted and quick study on this trade stuff. She wrapped up NAFTA in 1992, and in the interest of bipartisanship, allowed the Clinton administration to get it through Congress on a bipartisan basis. That was a laugh line. This is actually a standard MO. I'm sorry Rob had to leave. Standard MO for USTRs. I think it's a very healthy bipartisan thing where one USTR, one administration, starts something and then turns it over to their successor. Those of us who were involved in the those of them who were involved in China accession went through that. Those of us who were involved in the Doha round, there were Republicans and Democrats, many of us who inherited the Doha round. But NAFTA, Carla Hills, it would not have happened without you, and it clearly was such a fundamental turning point in U.S. trade policy, and I thank you. But I can't help but add an anecdote about Carla and about NAFTA. And this is one of my favorites. This comes from Jayme Serra, who was then the minister from Mexico, Carla's negotiating counterpart, along with Mike Wilson from Canada. And it was toward the end of the NAFTA negotiations, and the negotiations were getting really tough. Lot of tensions. And Carla is brilliant at reading the room. So she said, you know, why don't we just go to a baseball game? So they piled in a car, and they're on the way to the baseball game, and Carla looks at Jayme Serra and says, you've got a hole in your sweater. And it's Jayme Serra's favorite sweater. So Ambassador Hills opens her briefcase and pulls out red thread and a needle and proceeds to mend Jayme Serra's sweater. Talk about ultra-prepared, Mary Poppins style, right? Only our Carla Hills. How could you negotiate with this woman? A few data points before I close. You can add this one to your next USTR Trivial Pursuits game. Today, a majority of Yale Law School graduates are women. Not bad. When Carla Hills graduated from Yale Law School, she was one of 7 out of 177 graduates of Yale Law School. ASEAN has its Pathfinders. Here we have our Groundbreaker. And Carla Hills, as the first woman USTR, is certainly one of them. And I can tell you, having been the third woman USTR, it was such a yawner. No one cared. And that is how it should be. As we have noted, Carla was, and continues to be a class act, and I am very grateful to be able to congratulate you and to present you with the WITA Lifetime Achievement Award.
Well, I have to say that I'm enormously honored to be presented with this WITA Award, and it's a special privilege for me to be in this room with 2 trade superstars. As has been mentioned, Rufus Yerxa was my deputy when I served in the George Herbert Walker Bush administration, and he was fantastic. and Susan Schwab, who you just heard her exaggerations. But I'll tell you, she was a splendid successor at USTR. WITA, now celebrating its 40th year, has earned an outstanding reputation for being a neutral forum that can gather together diverse groups to engage in a robust discussion of critical trade issues. And the need for that kind of discussion has never been greater. With our politics polarized, if we are to maintain a free and open trading system that has contributed enormously both to our economy, our prosperity, and our security, it is essential that we get the facts out to the public and to their elected representatives at the state and local and the national level. And we've heard some wonderful remarks from some of our senators and congresspeople who have devoted a good deal of time and talent to the cause. According to last year's Gallup poll, roughly 1/3 of Americans believe that trade actually injures the U.S. economy. One reason why so many Americans hold an adverse view of trade is their lack of information about how international trade contributes to our economy. They do not know that 40 million jobs depend on our trade, or that 98% of U.S. companies that export are actually small and medium-sized businesses that account for 1/3 of our merchandise sales abroad. Nor are they aware that the United States is the world's largest exporter of services. According to studies by the Peterson Institute for International Economics, the opening of global markets from 1950 to 2018 generated an increase in U.S. GDP of $2 trillion. Our public hears little about how the increase in global trade over the past half-century has lifted 500 million people out of abject poverty. Studies by Dr. William Klein, also at the Peterson Institute, show that when a poor country increases its trade by just 1%, it decreases its poverty by an equal percent. And that is undoubtedly the most effective development tool that we have. So why should we care that expanding economic opportunities for poor countries, which helps them? It's because it also contributes to our security. When impoverished nations lack the resources to enforce their laws or to seal their borders, they very often become havens for international crime and terrorism. It's welcome news to me, and should be for all of us, that the just concluded World Trade Organization Ministerial that was attended by all 164 members, including China, Russia, Ukraine, the EU, and the United States, not only attended, but agreed to facilitate the export of COVID vaccines to vulnerable regions, to extend the moratorium on duties for cross-border transmissions, and after 2 decades of negotiations, to ban subsidies supporting illegal, unreported, and unregulated fisheries. They also promised to ensure that they would guarantee their nation's export restrictions would not prevent the UN World Food Program from obtaining supplies to address humanitarian concerns. And importantly, they agreed that the World Trade Organization needs to be updated and pledged that they would agree to a dispute settlement mechanism within the next 2 years. Now, much, much more needs to be done to maintain the momentum that this MC-12 of the World Trade Organization has established. And how do we do that? In my view, and it's admittedly controversial, it would be for us to rejoin the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And I say that because that partnership involves 11 nations, Pacific Rim countries. Its rules reduce tariffs. It opens services and investment, and it requires the free flow of data across borders. It restricts non-market practices of state-owned enterprises, creating a dispute settlement mechanism and labor standards, which would create a very, very useful example. Although some of the provisions that the United States proposed were dropped after we withdrew from the organization, current members have apparently said that those rules were only suspended and that they would welcome the United States to come back into the agreement. A number of nations have already lined up to join, including the United Kingdom, Thailand, Taiwan, and China. The U.S. should not wait. Its joinder would restore its leadership in a region that is even more important than would be provided by the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. And moreover, it would build support for the provisions, the very same provisions that we are anxious to add to the World Trade Organization. The fact that a sizable group of nations, including the world's largest economy, would adopt these rules for their own nation's benefit creates an incentive for other nations to support the inclusion of those rules into the WTO and to secure the benefits for their own nation. It will not be easy in this political climate, but it is worthy of a robust discussion, and no group more effective does a better job than WITA. And my hope is that the issue will receive a robust discussion and make a difference. It's been a great, great honor to be with you tonight, and I extend my warmest thanks to Susan, to Rufus, and to Ken, and say thank you to all of you for a wonderful evening. Somebody left their glasses. Now get one with him in the middle. I want my way.